Okay, so I guess most of you watched Dafi's talk, which explained how everyone agreeing on the same rules. So I'm gonna continue from there. I'm gonna talk more about the human aspect of it, because she explained how all the technical parts work exactly with each other by the same rules and they can't move. But every one of these parts is operated by humans. And they're the ones that are running the codes, they're the ones that are connecting it to the computer. So you have nodes, which are the ones that hold the blockchain, the history, and relay the transactions. And there's the miners with the huge hardware, also manned by people, by companies. There's different wallets, it's just a few different wallets. There's merchants. There's also financial service providers and all kinds of other businesses that are built around it. So anyway, usually Bitcoin works, everyone agrees on the rules, but what happens if we need to do an update? Okay, this feels much better. So what happens if we need to do an update? It can be just something like everyone that just really makes sense, some kind of little technical change to make things work better, or a bug fix. So as you see, the code of the Bitcoin, which everyone needs to download and everyone needs to install, has been updated a lot of times. So what happens, so the process, the governance process in Bitcoin is that basically there's an open mailing list for development, and people can upload their ideas and the changes they want to make, and it's discussed, and it's thoroughly discussed. It takes a long time, and it goes around the idea of wide consensus. That means like everyone has to agree. It only can be an idea that like everyone thinks is really good and makes sense with Bitcoin, and if it's debated, if it's somehow contentious, it won't go through. So usually the changes to Bitcoin, they come after like maybe a year in development. You need to get everyone to say it's a good idea, then you need to review it by a lot of people. And Bitcoin, it's there's really like world-class experts working on it. Anyway, I want to try to convey the idea that with the way Bitcoin works, there's no central management. There's the group, and if everyone sees they agree, they move forward. And that's the reason they move slowly. Like in, this is the Bitcoin GitHub, which is a site which helps software developers interact with open source projects to work together. So you can see there's 500 contributors to Bitcoin. So, so beyond the technical the promises of Bitcoin, like that there's 21 million coins, that there's a halving every 4 years. There's also other things which are like they're implied in the program, but they're also a social promise, like immutability, that you do a transaction and no one's going to erase it. This is also a technical feature because all the nodes are holding them, so you can't go and just erase all the nodes. But one of the so now I'm going to talk more about like the social promise that the Bitcoin community sees in Bitcoin. There's a belief in rules without rulers. That means that no one can go and take control of it and put a mummy, because the idea is that the hope for Bitcoin is that I can go to sleep for 5 years, and the program won't change. The program will give me the same things that it says it's going to be, which is money that is a monetary system that can't be controlled and can't be changed, and also that my coins can't be seized by anyone and can't be taken away from me. And the two things that are most important about it are the immutability and the censorship resistance. basically the human actors in the Bitcoin community, they want to make sure that the programmers don't go and suddenly they can go and change the program to, let's say, 22 million Bitcoins. They can do that technically, but the reason it's not going to happen is because everyone that runs the wallets and the nodes, they won't update their software to that. That's why it won't happen. So what happens if let's say I write my own program with 22 million Bitcoins on it, and I get some people from Tel Aviv to start running nodes and a few companies to accept a different kind of Bitcoin. So what will happen is the other nodes will just they'll just ban me. If they see that I'm writing things that don't comply to the rules of Bitcoin, they're just going to ban me. So really fast, they'll just turn into 2 different networks. And that's what's called a fork in coin. Basically, it becomes 2 different coins that share the same history of transactions, but they're not communicating, and I can't go back. So if I suddenly change the rules, like my coin that has 22 million Bitcoins and all kinds of different rules, I can't go backwards. And so that's so when the Bitcoin system wants to update and wants to change, everyone has to move together. Because if everyone isn't on board and everyone hasn't updated their software across all the different thousands or tens of thousands of people around the network, it can cause basically hard forks and a mess. It can cause the price to go down. It can cause confusion, and that's basically the reason that everyone has to be in this wide consensus. So this is the usual way it works. Basically, the development is done slowly and surely, because the idea specifically with Bitcoin is more like digital gold, which means you want it to be slow and steady. You want it to do the same things it always does, the amount of coins, it sends the transaction across the network, anyone can use it, doesn't matter if you're a UFO or any person, they don't check who you are, and you can send it to any person on Earth, and basically that's what it gives. And the fact that there's no one person that can press a button and can change the rules, is what makes it good money, basically. So that's also the reason that the Bitcoin community likes that the updates are basically happen slowly. For example, the last update, it's called Segregated Witness. It took over a year and a half to come in, and some people say, well, how is Bitcoin going to be technologically advanced if it's if you can't put in fast updates? But in this case, it's the opposite, because the technology is secondary. The most important thing is that the rules will stay the same, because that's what you want your money to be like. So what happens if there's problems? What happens if you want to change things? Well, this is, hope it doesn't freak you out. These are some Bitcoin enthusiasts. They're a little bit crazy. So I wanted to explain the history of some political stories that happened about keeping this consensus of what Bitcoin is, the immutability and the censorship resistance and everything. So until 2015, everyone was together in the same boat. And then 2 very prominent developers of Bitcoin came up and said they want to change the system. They want to change the governance. They want to cut away from the old slow team that I showed before, and they want to be the CEO of Bitcoin, be a benevolent dictator. They want to move things fast so Bitcoin can be ready for the masses. And very quickly, a lot of big companies in the Bitcoin ecosystem were on board. And I remember I was reading Bitcoin news internet sites that were actually owned by the companies signing it, and they said it's going to happen, that all the Bitcoin network is going to move under the control of these 2 people. And I really freaked out. I wanted to sell my Bitcoins because I didn't want it to be centralized. And I went on the internet and I started reading about who are these people, who are the people I want to give the governance to, and I came to my own conclusion that I didn't feel like I trusted them. So so there was there was a mess all over the internet, and the price also crashed. And but after a few days, it turned out that nothing was happening. That because the Bitcoin community, most of the holders and most of the users didn't like that, it didn't actually happen, even though a lot of the industry was on board. So, so that was the first, you're making me nervous tonight. It was the first political war that happened. That was called Bitcoin XT, and it went over, and Bitcoin stayed Bitcoin. And then later in 2016, another group came and said they want to, and soon I'll explain what's the meaning of this, which is the story that happened last year. But in 2016, there was another group. This time, because the first trying failed, it was taken less seriously. But this time, they signed down actually a lot of the Bitcoin miners. But still, you know, the system is so hard to move it, and it didn't move, and it went away. So, so the next thing happened in 2017 was a little different. This time, it wasn't people that were trying to take away the governance and take over the governance of Bitcoin. It was a new update that the developers wanted to put through, and it seemed that the whole community was on board. It was called segregated witness, and it was supposed to improve the use of make it cheaper to use Bitcoin and make Bitcoin stronger, and all kinds of features. So everyone thought they would just put it through. What usually happens is they put out the code, they wait at least a couple of months so all the services can update their own programs, and also they wait for the miners to signal that they also installed, so there won't be any confusion. So they waited, and the miners didn't upgrade. And so a year and a half passed, and it turns out that some of the big mining companies, for reasons that they never really explained, but it could be because I think they also felt that they might have the development being dictated to them. I mean, they have a huge investment in Bitcoin, and they just get the code from these people across the ocean, and maybe they felt that they want to see how much they can affect the development. And also, one of the big mining companies had a 50% advantage with their profits from the mining that would be taken away with this update, not on purpose. So that might have been the reasons they didn't want to update. So this went on, and it caused a political war on the groups and the forums and all, and a lot of hate and complaints. And so what happened in the end is a group of users decided they're going to threaten the miners and do something called UASF, like on these hats. They said they were going to, at a certain date, they were going to upgrade their nodes to a different program, and they have a lot of nodes. And I think a lot of the enthusiasts are the ones that are running the nodes, and they'll put a code that kicks out the miners from the network if they're not running the new update, if they're not running Segwit. And basically that would cause a split. And that would cause mess, and who knows what. It's like a really scary plan. But, and to prove how determined they were, they put up these photos of UASF, because basically it's screwing up Bitcoin. If they're going to split from the miners, that's really bad for the system running as usual. It's bad for the price, it's bad for everything. But the idea was that because they have all their ideals standing behind it, they want decentralization, they don't want companies to affect the development, they're willing to do this crazy thing, with these, not all the, obviously the enthusiasts put up these photos, these are extreme cases, to show the idea that in this case, they were able to win because they were allowed to, they were willing to get hurt. While the mining companies, they don't want to lose money. So what happened was that a really big group of these are tons of actors in the system, different companies, wallets, miners, just a huge amount of the companies in the Bitcoin space met in New York. And they made an agreement called the New York Agreement for Segwit 2X. So they said this is going to be, I think this was maybe caused because of the UASF and all the mess. They said we're going to have a compromise, and we're going to install Segwit, but we're also going to do something else. We're going to increase the block size, which is something people, like, SegWit was supposed to be, instead of increasing the block size, so it was kind of weird, and it's not what the users wanted. But this way made the miners feel better because they were getting some say in what's going to happen. And so they said, okay, we're going to install SegWit, and then a few months later, we'll also increase the block size. So this kind of let them like lose without losing face, because they realized that the users aren't moving. So people didn't like that either. They didn't want companies telling them what the protocol is going to be. So they also showed their protest. So, for example, people took their Zappo credit card. Zappo is one of these. It's a service provider that you send them Bitcoin and it lets you use a credit card anywhere in the world. So that's really a great service. And it was basically the main service for credit cards for Bitcoin. It still is, I think. And so people uploaded to Reddit pictures of them cutting their credit cards because they said, no, like Zappo, you're not going to dictate all these corporate people are going to dictate to us what Bitcoin is. So it did work, and the New York Agreement was canceled. And that was, I think, a beautiful thing to see, that the community of the people who believe in decentralization. They don't want financial interests to affect the development, and they won this year, and I think that's really great. But we still need to see how it develops. I mean, on the technical side of Bitcoin, it's supposed to make this. This year we saw this happening in practice, but. Supposedly, this was theoretically what was supposed to happen anyway, because the miners can't, basically there was a debate if the miners are the ones to control the code. We saw that it wasn't, but also, like, technically, we'd seen before that it wasn't, but now it got proof. Okay, so anyway, this is, like, that was a little about the governance process of Bitcoin, which right now is controlled by the enthusiasts, the people that believe in the vision it gives. So, to explain more and contrast that, I'll explain about a different governance of Ethereum. Who recognizes this young man? Vitaly. So this is Vitaly Couture. He's someone from the Bitcoin community that everyone trusts, everyone thinks is, like, really great and really smart. And he in I think in 2014 he raised a lot of bitcoins to create another coin called Ethereum. I won't talk so much about what it does, but its governance is different. First of all, it's more centralized. It has a foundation based in Switzerland, and basically the idea here is they're treating it like a startup. They want to move fast and break things. They want to do a lot of updates, a lot of changes. So the idea is that they trust Vitalik to make the right decisions. They'll take the guidance from him. The developers are paid by the Ethereum Foundation, and another thing that's good about decentralization is that the Ethereum Foundation raised a lot of money. So they also have part of the Ethereum from the beginning. So they can pay developers, they can have graphic designers, they can have advertisers, and this is something that makes it also maybe be more efficient in a way. But on the other hand, the problem is you have to trust one guy, and if you're actually afraid of a state actor or something corrupting the system, this is really dangerous. Basically, Ethereum ran as it was supposed to, and then we had last year example of the difference in governance of this kind of system. So what happened was there was in Ethereum you can write programs, all kinds of programs that move around money, and upload them to Ethereum, and then the whole network, like in Bitcoin, enforces these rules. So you can make all kinds of systems that control money. So there's an idea of a DAO. It's a decentralized autonomous organization. So they wanted to do an organization, the first decentralized venture capital. So they wrote a program that controls it, and it has voters and all kinds of systems and stuff like that. And they uploaded it. But even though it was an experiment, And actually a friend of mine who's a very good programmer told me he looked at the code and it seemed like a 12-year-old wrote it, but they sent $90 million into this contract. And they were locked them up there, I guess because of overexcitement possibly. So all these coins were sitting on the Ethereum network inside a program that's controlling them. And so a hacker came along and he found like one word, something really, really little not in place, and he stole $30 million out of this contract of the users. And that was a huge hack for Ethereum back then. And so people were saying, what is it going to happen? I mean, because Vitalik can decide to change the history. If everyone agrees to change the blockchain, the history of the blockchain, so it's changed. It's just the word of the computer. I mean, it's not a problem. But on the other hand, until then, it seemed that the promise was of immutability, that the whole idea of these decentralized systems, that you can't roll them back and you can't change them. But anyway, what happened was that they decided to fork the network and change the history. And they got most of the community to be on board with that. That means everyone needs to update their programs, and all the miners need to change. And basically, they were going to leave the old network to die, because if my history is different from your history, I'm just going to ban you, and we're just going to split up into different networks. So they had the day where they were going to split, and they thought the old chain would die. But some people from the Ethereum community didn't like this. They wanted the promise of the immutability. So they started running Ethereum Classic. And Ethereum Classic was born. And that was a different coin. And one of the big exchanges put it in. And all the people who had Ethereum before got this other coin. And it started being traded. It's something they didn't expect. They were saying they're going to leave the old chain to die. But because the system is decentralized, they couldn't actually control it, and some people who didn't like the idea that they were changing the history, just took hold of it. I mean, basically in Ethereum, like technically it's the same as Bitcoin. The consensus can be achieved the way Bitcoin is achieved, or in this case, it's just because people, they decide they want to listen to Vitalik and the Ethereum Foundation, and that's how they decide the code to run on their computer. There's also, of course, discussion inside the Ethereum community about things, so basically it just has a different nature. And so these are like two main different kinds of governance we have in open blockchains. And there's also, so there's the foundations, and then there's the more open, no rulers, slow, let's call it slow process with the wide consensus. And it's kind of hard to say exactly how this is achieved, but until now it's achieved. So these are a few more kinds of, a few groups of governances. The ones that have the way I explained that are similar to Bitcoin are Litecoin, Decred, and Monero, maybe some others. And then there's these kinds have a foundation, like Ethereum and Zcash and IOTA. So this is more of a centralized development. And then there's Ripple, and a lot of other companies, especially ICOs, that are completely centralized. They are run by a company. The network itself might be decentralized, might not, but all the decisions, they come from above, they make the decision, and they change what's going to happen. And a lot of the smaller projects are like that, because there's not a lot of people in them, and I guess most of the ICOs as well. So in this case, they're only using the technology. They're using the technology, but not the whole promise of it. It's not the complete decentralization. That's it. Like right now, it's nice to see that supposedly the decentralization in Bitcoin is working. But as there's going to be more users, it's harder to say what's going to happen. I mean, I think right now, most of the users, they have a friend who's a Bitcoin enthusiast, and he's going to tell them if anything happens. And most of the information comes from the internet, where there's tons of different people updating their opinions, and it seems to be working. But when let's say if there'll be, tens of millions of people using it, it might, evolve different directions, and be interesting to see what happens. And yeah, that's it. I also wanted to say the problem with this, with the decentralized Bitcoin system is that the more people that are in it and the more money that's involved with it, it's much harder to put every update through, because there's much more pressures, and the last update took 1.5 years to put through, So I guess we need to see what happens. I mean, my hope is that Bitcoin gets to a point where it's completely more or less ready, and then it can just be locked, and then we won't have these problems anymore, and that's it.